to the Monster Mash Marathon Day 3, and we are talking about Bull Street Asylum. Okay, let's get into it. So, today I'm going to tell you guys a little about South Carolina Lunatic Asylum, aka Bull Street Asylum. It was founded in 1821 and opened in 1828 by the General Assembly to provide medical care for people with mental illness in South Carolina. It took so long to open due to some delays and cost overruns, but it was founded by a small group of lawyers, legislators, doctors, and etc. It's located on Bull Street in Columbia, South Carolina. The original building from the asylum is the nation's oldest surviving mental health hospital. Founders claim to be influenced by early European ideas of moral treatment and therapeutic optimism, and hope to create a curative institution for patients of all classes. And I think that it's important to reinforce that they wanted a curative institution, which means they wanted to cure people. They didn't just want to house people that were deemed insane, and they want this to be care that would be for all patients. I think that was pretty revolutionary for the 1800s. In the first few years, the asylum struggled to get off of its feet, and there were very few patients enrolled, which of course led to some financial problems. Now they had this really wacky-tacky business plan. I don't really know why, or I guess I could see why they thought this would work, but it doesn't seem like a successful business plan. Let me tell you all about it. So, their business plan was that fees of wealthy patients was supposed to subsidize the cost of poor patients who the counties paid for when needed. So, the idea is you charge your wealthy patients so much that they're able to cover the cost of themselves and any poor patients that you would also have admitted. But if they couldn't, if they didn't have enough money to cover the poor patients, the counties would subsidize the amount. So basically, the fees from the wealthy patients were supposed to cover themselves and the poor patients. This business plan never really worked. And the counties had to chip in a lot to cover the expenses of the low income patients. So basically what they were charging their wealthy patients wasn't enough, or they didn't have enough wealthy patients in comparison to how many low income patients they had to cover the cost. So they weren't even breaking even, because they were needing to go to the county to get subsidies for the low income patients, which was pretty interesting. Before 1860, the number of patients at this asylum was low, remaining below 200. They were nearly all white, and less than 50% of them were able to cover their own fees. So yeah, they had way more low income patients than they had wealthy wealthy patients, and for the price that they were charging their wealthy patients, it was not enough to cover everyone, leaving them more and more in debt. And so, in 1849, the General Assembly passed an act allowing the admission of black patients, freed and enslaved, but this was not very impactful. In 1865, which would be like 16 years later, only 5 black patients were in residence. After the Civil War, blacks and whites were admitted to the asylum on the same basis. And when I saw this was on like the South Carolina History government website. What does that mean? So before, even though they were allowing they were saying that they were allowing blacks to be admitted, were there special bases that were not the same as the white patients? Like, what? So, after the Civil War, black and whites were admitted to the asylum on the same basis. The war also increased the low-income population, which led to more and more low-income admissions to the hospital. In 1871, the state took on the cost of care for the low-income patients, so it was no longer like county by county responsibility. The state just took over for all of the low-income patients. By 1900s, there were about 1,000 patients, and by 1920, there are about 2,000 patients. Almost all low income, state paid, and almost half of them were black. So, also in 1865, the asylum shifted its founding principles. Now remember, they were founded for curative care. They were shifting away from the idea of curative care and adopted like a custodial function of long-term, taking care of like large amounts of people, primarily deemed chronic and uncurable. So they were kind of like a place for the mentally insane. Like these were people who were supposedly like barred from society, so they come to a place like this to live out the rest of their days, or maybe get help, but you know. In addition, there were 2 major legislative investigations that were conducted in 1909 and 1914, where they found like unsanitary conditions, a crazy high mortality rate, and a lot of this was specifically affecting their black patient population. There were all kinds of people who spent time in this asylum. I think one of the most infamous people is Pee Wee Gaskins. He was a serial killer in South Carolina. He claimed to kill around 100 people, most of which were hitchhikers or people he had a personal vendetta with. He was also named the meanest man in America, and he was executed in 1991 via the electric chair because, yeah, he was sentenced to death. But before that, he was at Bull Street Asylum, and there was like a nurse accounting that she saw him being escorted to his cell. But other than that, there isn't much about like him, or for that matter, anybody else that was in this particular asylum. And that's really weird because like, where are the patient records? Where is the money, LaShandra? If you know, you know. If you don't, I'm sorry. So the asylum was shut down in 1997 missing from the file cabinets, and that makes people wonder, like, what really happened inside of this institution. So, I came across this project called People, Not Patients, and this is a project funded by the South Carolina Humanities to document the lives of people who spend time at South Carolina Lunatic Asylum. I'm gonna read you guys some excerpts from the site, but check it out. There's way more people on there than what I talk about. There's more detail than what I go into. These are just a few excerpts. It's called People, Not Patients, and I'll put the link of it in the description box. Okay, so let's get into some of these excerpts. The first person we're going to talk about is Harriet Jane Grey. Harriet Jane Grey of Columbia was admitted to the South Carolina Lunatic Asylum on April 5th, 1830. Harriet was considered a pay patient, and her husband and local builder, William Gray, and business partner, architect Robin Yates, funded her stay, which cost $15 a year. I did the conversion, and in today's time, that's $528. The Grays had 3 children, a newborn son, one daughter under the age of 5, and one daughter under the age of 10. They had also previously lost their daughter Mary in 1825 at the age of 22 months. The 1830 census also shows that the Grays enslaved what was likely a young mother and her 3 children of similar ages of their own. This family would have performed the labor in the Grays' home and perhaps would have been hired out for local jobs such as cleaning and gathering wood. The Grays' status as enslavers indicated that they were financially comfortable and likely respected members of Columbia society in the years and months leading up to Harriet's committal. Dr. De Leon provided a patient history describing Harriet's symptoms during the weeks leading up to her committal. She was of medium stature with dark skin and hair and blue eyes. Her youngest child, only 8 months old, indicating that Harriet's symptoms had begun sometime after giving birth. De Leon observed that after time, her insanity had progressed to hysterical insanity, brought on by intemperance and the use of spirits. He had previously treated her with eminence and drastic cathartics, which are tonics that induce vomiting, and warm bath salts. These were common treatments for asylum patients at the time. Harriet initially underwent a variety of additional treatments, including bloodletting and the ingestion of calomel, which was liquid mercury. These treatments are a little freaky, I can't lie. This is like crazy stuff. And Fowler's solution, which was a dice of arsenic tonic. On April 17th, she became so noisy as to require the dark room. She remained in the dark isolation for a month and was only permitted to rejoin other patients on June 22nd. Although seemingly extreme, this action still aligned with the concept of moral treatment. If Harriet's removal from the comfort of her family and home cannot break her delusion, then perhaps deprivation of sound and sight might. Although no longer referenced as insane, Harriet continued a cycle of treatments that seemed to compound her physical symptoms. Towards the end of her stay, she had digestive issues and little appetite. Finally, after a little over 5 months, months later noted her as still insane, but much better. That is crazy. Still insane, but much better. Oh my god. Do y'all hear my neighbors? All that romping and bumping. Yeah. Still insane, but much better is actually like a little crazy. Like, what? So on March 8th, 1832, Harriet was readmitted to the asylum and bore mental and physical health. In the subsequent months, the asylum staff kept her hands bound and leather muffs on to prevent her from eating lime off of the walls and dirt off of the floors. She developed a persistent fever before eventually dying of infection. October 6th, Harriet's friends buried her at Trinity Episcopal Cathedral Cemetery near her daughter Mary. Yeah, so that's the story of Harriet Jane Grey. Pretty crazy. It seems like she had like postpartum depression, maybe, because these symptoms all started like right after her daughter was born. And maybe her daughter was like sick because her daughter ended up passing away. So that probably gave her like a deep postpartum depression. And then this place did not seem to help her. Like the deprivation, the dark room with no sight, no sound. What? That is like actually crazy. Let's go on to the next excerpt. Next is Angelina and Louisa Burrow. Sisters Louisa and Angelina Burrow were admitted to the South Carolina Lunatic Asylum on February 16, 1933, alongside other pauper patients from the Charleston poorhouse. I had to look up what a pauper was. Like, I never really heard that term before, y'all. I don't know. So, apparently, a pauper is like someone in old times that was like really, really poor. So they just hung out in groups, kind of like homeless people do now, and begged together instead of calling them homeless people or the unhoused. They called them paupers. Same idea. And there used to be like these different houses which were kind of like shelters where paupers could come and stay. But I guess if people started acting too crazy, they shipped them off like in batches to the lunatic asylum. Yeah. So the sisters were first generation immigrants, as were most of the other individuals admitted from the Charleston poorhouse, of course. Whether the Burrows arrived alone from France or with family is unknown, as how long they lived in Charleston before arriving to the poorhouse. So we don't know if they have family or not. We don't know how long they've been in Charleston from France. We just know that they were sisters and that they were immigrants from France. According to an asylum physician, Angelina had been ill for many years, but was good-humored and disposed to accommodate herself to all about her. She remained confined in the Mills building until her death on May 29, 1837, from a sudden and violent hemorrhage from the uterus. Perhaps a miscarriage is what it was presumed to be. That's fishy. Louisa proved to be her siblings' opposite in both health and temperament. She enjoyed uninterrupted health following her arrival, but was considered by physicians to be the most irritable being. What medical treatment she received, if any, in the 1940s and the 1950s are unknown. Patients had access to flower gardens, numerous books, and recent newspaper games, including Bagatelle. I never looked up what Bagatelle was, you guys. We have to look it up right now. Okay. Bagatelle refers to a table game where players use cues to shoot balls up an inclined playfield, trying to get them into holes or cups while navigating pins as obstacles. Oh, it says it's an ancestor of the modern pinball machine. Okay. Not pinball. Okay. So, yeah, they had access to all of those things as well as like a sewing workshop. But whether or not she was able to choose to participate in these forms of morale treatment went unrecorded. Like other long-living paupers without family, friends, or financial means, Louisa would spend the rest of her life confined as a patient. She died on June 7th, 1864, 31 years after her arrival. The sisters were likely buried separately in Potter's Field, bounded by Zenit Wayne, Pendleton, and Pulaski Streets. So like there's like a common theme with the Bull Street Asylum where even though they had let go of like the pay patient model because the state completely took over like the low income patients, throughout the entirety of like its establishment, there was a difference between the wealthier patients and the poor patients, where like the wealthier patients would have opportunity and access to the things I just named, like the games and the societies and the newspapers. But because there's no record of the poor patients having access to these things, it is believed that these things were not made available to them. So the last person we're going to talk about is Micajah Vaughn. Micajah Vaughn, a Camden resident who suffered from epilepsy, spent 10 months at the South Carolina Lunatic Asylum after being admitted on February 5th, 1835. As another pauper patient who could not afford treatment, he was previously housed in the Kirchard District Poorhouse. So he came from another poorhouse. When Micajah arrived in Columbia, asylum staff knew nothing about him, not even his age, and the asylum physician, Dr. John W. Parker, judged him to be quiet and idiotic, as well as occasionally violent. On his intake from the day that a few days after he came in, one of the doctors recorded, "I have been examining him daily. No prospect of curing him. His mind seems to be utterly broken down." Yeah, doctors documented a few of Micajah's fits or seizures throughout 1835 and over time claimed he had lapsed into constantly talking in a language known as schoolboy's gibberish. Like other pauper patients, Micajah received less provocative treatment than those whose families could afford to pay, and he likely found himself with little to no clothing, shoes, or blankets due to the asylum's ongoing budget issues. Makasha died on December 6, 1835, and was likely buried in the Pauper Cemetery in downtown Columbia. So yeah, those are a few stories, real life stories from Bull Street Asylum, the second oldest. Um, wait, what was the statistic? The oldest surviving mental hospital. Yeah, didn't seem like a place that anyone would want to be. And also with the Makasha story, I think like having seizures and someone who had seizures like back in the 1800s. I don't have seizures. I feel like I worded that wrong. For Makasha's story, I feel like being in the 1800s in a landscape where we didn't really understand what seizures were and how to care for them, being someone that had seizures and just being placed in like an asylum for people who are mentally insane is rough because you need real care. Like everyone in these asylums needed real care for like mental health, but no one was able to get real care. Like I said, this place was shut down, but it's pretty creepy. There are videos of people like going inside and walking around. It's pretty creepy.